There is a kind of silence that is not heard with the ears but with the soul. It begins as an almost imperceptible whisper, and little by little takes shape until it transforms into a dense, almost material presence. It is the silence that settles in when existence loses its echo, when there is no one left to hear what pulsates within us. It is not loneliness, it is the void between being and the world. That instant, when the gaze seeks a human reflection and finds only smooth, indifferent surfaces, incapable of returning meaning. In this suspended space, time seems to slow down, and every common gesture, opening a door, looking out the window, breathing, becomes a silent confirmation that something essential has been lost. Carl Jung said that human beings cannot bear the emptiness of their own souls, and therefore incessantly seek the other, the mirror, the reflection, the gaze that returns them to themselves. But what happens when this mirror breaks? When the world offers no return, and the subject is forced to confront their own fragmented, isolated image without external reference. In this absence of mirrors, consciousness turns inward, like a river that has lost its course and begins to carve abysses in its own bed. What is born from this movement is not only introspection, but an involuntary plunge into the unconscious, that place where the echoes of everything we once were and everything we could still be live. Those who find themselves friendless, not by choice but by circumstance, know this silence well. It is not the rest of the mind, but the muffled noise of a void that cannot be filled with distractions. Depth psychology reveals that prolonged isolation not only saddens, it reshapes the very fabric of the mind. The brain, deprived of human contact, reconfigures itself in self-defense. The neural pathways that once responded to faces, gestures, and voices become silent territories. Social perception weakens, empathy becomes diffuse, and the external world begins to seem distant, like a blurred memory of something that may no longer have truly existed. But the drama doesn't begin here. It's rooted in personal history, in small forgotten wounds. Perhaps it all started with childhood exclusion, a cursed word uttered in the schoolyard, a disdainful glance that taught the body to withdraw. Perhaps it was a subtle betrayal, a friend who left without explanation, a broken promise that taught the heart to distrust touch. These are seemingly small events, but within them lie the archetypes of loss, the repeated dramas of all humanity. Jung asserted that the unconscious is like an underground theater, where the same roles are played by different faces throughout the centuries. Today's abandonment is merely the reenactment of an ancient myth, the exile of the being who seeks return and finds no haven. And that's how the mechanism sets in. The fear of rejection becomes a lens. The gaze gets used to detecting signs of distance where none exist. An unanswered message becomes proof of indifference. A postponed invitation transforms into confirmation of not belonging. The body itself begins to translate this distorted reading. The chest closes, the smile hesitates, the voice loses firmness. The other person perceives something but doesn't understand what. They retreat, and this retreat becomes new proof of rejection. The cycle is formed. The invisible machine of isolation works with tragic precision. Within this cycle, the individual creates an inner world of uncontrollable intensities. Internal dialogues multiply. The mind becomes a space of voices and shadows, an arena where every memory is revisited and reinterpreted. Sometimes these voices try to console, other times they accuse, question, punish. There is no rest. The self is divided into observer and observed, judge and defendant, victim and executioner. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow, the moment when we are forced to look at what we have always avoided seeing. Loneliness then becomes the stage for this inevitable confrontation, and what is discovered there is disturbing. Most of what we call pain doesn't come from outside, but from the internal abyss that opens up when we lose our connection with meaning. The absence of friends is fundamentally a mirror of the absence of ourselves. The other person returns to us the image we forgot to sustain. Without them, the reflection dissolves, and the identity previously sustained by the gaze of others dissolves in the rarefied air of consciousness. The being begins to doubt itself, not because it has lost the love of the world, but because it has lost its own center. It is at this moment that something new can be born, for when the external world becomes inaccessible, the gaze is forced to pass through the mirror and walk inward. The pain of isolation then transforms into a calling, a disguised initiation. Jung saw solitude not as punishment, but as an archetypal ritual of individuation. It is there, in the absence of external noise, that the being finally hears the subterranean sound of its own soul. Each instant of pain becomes a symbol. Each memory of rejection becomes a fragment of the map that leads to the lost center. Even so, the journey is dangerous. The same silence that reveals also devours. The same mirror that shows the inner face can shatter under the weight of one's own perception. Many are lost on this path because they confuse isolation with destiny, when in reality it is merely a symbolic gateway. Jung warned that the most intense light always casts the deepest shadow. Those who descend into the hell of abandonment can, if they can bear the gaze, find there the fire of rebirth. But for that, it is necessary to accept the risk of seeing one's own face without disguise. Silence then ceases to be merely pain and becomes language. It begins to communicate what words could never reach, the need for reconciliation with what we were and with what we have not yet dared to be. The absence of friends reveals what was hidden beneath the noise of superficial relationships. It is in this deserted territory, where the human voice fades, that the spirit finds the necessary space to pronounce its true name. And it is precisely at that moment, when all seems lost, that something awakens deep within, a faint glimmer, a premonition, a whisper from the depths. Something within us begins to remember that emptiness can be the beginning of a revelation, and silence can be merely the prelude to a new way of listening. When external conversation fades, internal conversation begins to scream. There is no longer the sound of voices, only their echo repeating itself inside the head, like a scratched record. The scenes return in sequence. The smile that was not returned, the word spoken out of turn, the message sent and never answered. Everything is reviewed, re-edited, reenacted, as if the past could still be corrected by the insistence of memory. The mind transforms into a stage and a prison. The dialogues prolong themselves in silence, the imaginary answers multiply, and each forgotten gesture requires the weight of a confession. It is there in this intimate theater that many build entire friendships with ghosts, friends who never existed, perfect companions who live only in the invisible architecture of thought. This mental refuge has the sweetness of shelter and the cruelty of confinement. Inside, no one judges, no one betrays, no one leaves, but no one returns the gaze either. Carl Jung said that modern man lives surrounded by walls of rationality and yet is imprisoned by what he denies. Emotional isolation is one of these invisible prisons. It disguises itself as protection, when in reality it is a subtle form of self-sabotage. The mind creates an internal world so detailed, so coherent, that contact with reality begins to seem like a threat to the order of the imagination. And the more one tries to protect the heart, the more inaccessible it becomes. In everyday life, this manifests itself almost imperceptibly. There's the neighbor who always says good morning but never looks you in the eye. The co-worker who speaks smiling but always seems to be somewhere else. The silence during the coffee break. The gesture of taking the cell phone out of your pocket just to appear busy. Small rituals of distancing. No one notices, but everyone is trying to protect themselves from the same wound. The fear of not being accepted, of not being seen, of being too much or too little. Everyone hides, some behind masks of joy, others behind irony, still others behind a convenient tiredness that justifies the absence of connections. And yet, there's always a glimmer of desire hidden in their eyes, a silent plea for connection. Those who have lived for a long time without friendships develop a kind of clinical eye for human behavior. They become meticulous observers of other people's lives. They know when a smile is forced, when a conversation is merely formality, when a presence is just convenience. They can perceive the cracks in relationships as one sees flaws in a window under the light. Jung would say that this is the gift of the excluded, to see the world from outside the circle, to perceive the hidden symbols in the attitudes that others take for granted. But this gift is a double-edged sword. Those who see too much suffer too much. The sensitivity that could unite becomes a barrier. It is difficult to trust when you see through masks. The paradox is cruel. These people yearn for authentic connections, but the very intensity of their longing frightens others. They want conversations that have weight, silences that have meaning, presences that are whole. But the modern world doesn't move at that pace. We live amidst fleeting interactions, programmed smiles, and fluid affections. When someone appears with depth in their eyes, the atmosphere recoils. It's as if the truth were an inconvenience. And so, the one who most desires connection is precisely the one who causes the most discomfort. The sensitive heart becomes a walking exile. On long nights when the body rests, the mind awakens and begins its internal dialogue again. Why can't I fit in? What is it about me that repels? The questions accumulate, and the silence seems to answer them with a weight that cannot be translated into words. At these times, an almost physical sensation arises, as if there were a glass between the self and the world. You can see everything, but nothing touches, and this glass wasn't placed from the outside in, but from the inside out. It is the mind, shaped by pain, that has erected its own walls. Jung stated that what we try hardest to protect ourselves from is precisely what we most need to confront. Loneliness, in this sense, is a relentless teacher. It forces the spirit to look at what it has always avoided. There are days when memories of the past dangerously blend with the present. A casual gesture from someone on the street awakens old memories, and suddenly the heart reacts as if reliving a distant loss. The body holds onto the memory of emotions the mind tried to forget. And at certain moments everything returns: the smell of a place, the tone of a voice, the texture of abandonment. It is in these instants that life seems to conspire to test how much we still resist feeling. Jung saw these emotional reunions as manifestations of the unconscious, trying to re-establish dialogue with consciousness. It's not chance, it's the psyche asking for reconciliation. And there are subtle, almost imperceptible turns that change the course of inner history. Sometimes it's a gesture of kindness from a stranger, an unassuming smile, a simple question, a brief listening. Small cracks in the wall of isolation. Something in the body reacts. The chest opens for a moment. The breath deepens. The soul remembers what it is to be seen. But soon fear arises, the apprehension that all this is just an illusion. The impulse to withdraw returns. Yet, something has changed. A seed of doubt has been planted in the pain. What if, perhaps, it is still possible to trust? The danger, however, is returning to the cycle. Excessive awareness makes the human experience almost unbearable. Seeing hidden intentions, perceiving the unspoken, feeling the weight of others' emotions, all this is exhausting. Lucidity without love is poison. And without a human mirror to balance the gaze, the mind risks distorting itself in endless self-analysis. Jung said that whoever dives too deep into the unconscious, without taking a thread of light with them, risks not finding their way back. Isolation, if not understood as a right, transforms into a labyrinth. However, there is a subtle difference between being lost and being guided. Sometimes emptiness itself seems to orchestrate improbable encounters, small coincidences that sound like coded messages. A song playing at the exact moment, a phrase overheard by chance, a memory that arises from nowhere. These are flashes of meaning that break the monotony of silence. Jung called this synchronicity, the secret dialogue between the inner and outer worlds. When the soul begins to move, the universe responds and life regains its texture. It is at this point that isolation begins to dissolve from within, even before it dissolves from the outside. The person who once believed they were destined to lack friends begins to realize that, before finding others again, they need to learn to find themselves. That true connection doesn't arise from a desperate need for companionship, but from the serenity of someone who accepts themselves completely. Loneliness ceases to be a reflection of lack and becomes the womb of a new way of being in the world. It is in this space between the end and the beginning that the individual begins to sense a silent change. It's not about having friends again, but about becoming someone capable of friendship. And when that recognition begins to emerge, something inside quiets down. The gaze no longer seeks approval, but presence. Fear gives way to curiosity. The mind, which previously reviewed every mistake, begins to open itself to chance. Loneliness is still there, but it has changed form. It has ceased to be a wound and has become a path. In the midst of this journey, there is a premonition of reunion, a feeling that somewhere, someone is also trying to break their own glass. And it is at this point of living expectation, between what was and what is yet to come, that destiny seems to breathe. There is something lurking, something moving on the edges of the invisible. And without the protagonist realizing it, life prepares the first thread of connection, the point where chance and the unconscious touch. And when that happens, nothing will ever be the same again. Over time, the silence that once seemed like protection begins to transform into a burden. The mind, already accustomed to conversing with itself, begins to repeat thought patterns with the precision of a machine. Everything said internally echoes without contradiction, and each idea is born and dies under the same weary gaze. The external world, once feared, begins to pulsate in the distance with a kind of almost physical call, as if something out there were trying to remind us that time is still running. And it is then that the individual realizes they haven't experienced an event that truly marks them in a long time. There are no witnesses to their joys, nor accomplices in their failures. Life has become a sequence of days that leave no trace. Does time exist when no one shares it? Does memory have value if there is no one to confirm it? Prolonged solitude reorganizes the perception of time and reality. Without interaction with others, hours dilate or contract unpredictably. An afternoon can last an eternity, while an entire week dissolves into a formless void. The body becomes accustomed to the internal rhythm and loses synchronicity with the world. Jung described this condition as a detachment from the axis of consciousness. The self ceases to revolve around reality and begins to orbit its own unconscious. It is not madness, it is a kind of hibernation of the soul. The individual, without realizing it, enters a state of existential suspension where everything seems simultaneously possible and distant. But then something subtle happens. A sound, a color, a memory awakens the feeling that the world still breathes on the other side of the invisible wall. And the question arises, is it possible to feel again without getting hurt? Modern life, with its digital shop windows, amplifies the contrast between presence and absence. While the solitary individual observes others sharing smiles, encounters, and celebrations on screens, they feel a kind of pain that is not envy, but displacement. It's as if there were a universal language of belonging whose words they have forgotten. To survive, they learn to pretend. They create small strategies to appear included. They post generic phrases, like photos of acquaintances, respond to messages with neutral emojis. The social theater continues, but the actor no longer believes in the role. And when someone casually asks, "How was your weekend?" the heart hesitates. The true answer would be, "Away from everything, trying to remember who I am." But what is said is, "Relaxed, I rested a bit." The social mask smiles so as not to frighten the other person. This small disguise is understandable, almost necessary, but little by little it transforms into a prison. It's easier to lie than to explain, and each time one pretends to be okay, the inner abyss deepens a little more. At what point did we start believing that hiding something is safer than feeling it? How often is normalcy just an elegant form of despair? Gradually, isolation becomes so familiar that reuniting with the other person feels like a threat. The mind rehearses possible dialogues, but each real attempt is hampered by the fear of getting the tone, gesture, or timing wrong. The simple act of conversing becomes a conscious exercise. The body has unlearned spontaneity. Speech comes out calculated, the eyes avert. And the worst part is realizing that others perceive this discomfort, interpreting it as coldness or disinterest. It's a cruel irony. The desire for connection manifests as distance. The more one wants to be close, the more distance is created. And then night falls. There is always a moment when the silence grows again, and solitude reveals itself in its purest form, not the absence of company, but the absence of a mirror. No human voice echoes there, and thought unfolds upon itself until it becomes a labyrinth. Jung warned that when the unconscious speaks too loudly, the ego risks getting lost in its own depths. But perhaps it is precisely in this danger that something new is formed. Could extreme loneliness also be a boundary for another type of perception? A mind that has lived alone for too long begins to see the world with almost mythical eyes. Coincidences become signs, noises gain meaning, the gestures of others seem like messages. A sensitivity awakens, a listening that transcends words, and at times, the universe responds with synchronicities so precise that they seem written for that exact moment. A song heard by chance, a phrase in a book opened at random, a fortuitous encounter on an ordinary street. Chance ceases to seem random and transforms into an invitation. The world, once silent, begins to whisper back. But this return is not simple. The individual fears their own hope. Each attempt at connection is accompanied by the fear of being misinterpreted, rejected, or worse, over-understood. There is an ancient terror of being truly seen. However, it is in this gap between fear and desire that movement begins. The soul takes risks in small gestures, responding to a message, accepting an invitation, holding eye contact. Nothing grandiose, just discrete movements that announce an awakening. The first contact with another after long periods of seclusion has the delicacy of a miracle and the tension of a leap into the dark. Words stumble, silences are uncomfortable, but there is something different this time, a presence that listens without haste. Time seems suspended, and within this suspension the heart learns to breathe again. Jung would say it is the self calling the ego back to the center, the psyche beginning to heal its own cracks. What if the true meaning of friendship isn't about finding someone to complete us, but someone who reminds us who we already are? The discovery comes slowly. The other is neither a savior nor a perfect mirror, but a witness to rebirth. In their presence, isolation takes on form and history. Scars begin to have a voice and old pain transforms into narrative. For the first time, silence is not emptiness, but a shared space. The conversation, however brief, carries the symbolic weight of a return to life. The individual realizes that it is not necessary to explain what they have lived through. It is enough to be there, breathing together. As the days go by, the mind begins to re-educate itself. Fear still exists, but it no longer paralyzes. Time regains its color. The hours once again fit into the rhythm of the world. Loneliness, which was once a wound, now becomes an initiatory memory, the place where the soul learned to listen to its own sound. And although life continues to demand courage, there is something new sustaining the being, a discreet, almost secret confidence that it is possible to belong without losing oneself. And when that certainty begins to solidify, something unexpected happens. A slight unease, a premonition that there is still more to be understood. Because friendship, that human miracle, may only be the prelude to an even deeper encounter. What lies beyond the human bond? What invisible force brings destinies together, crosses the boundaries of time, and weaves coincidences as if they were threads of the same dream? Something stirs in the shadows of consciousness, something that is yet to be named, and it is this silent presence, subtle, insistent, inevitable, that paves the way for what is to come. Because at its core, every true friendship is merely the first clue to a much greater mystery, the reunion with one's own destiny. The night always begins the same way. The blue glow of the screens replaces the reflection of the windows, and familiar faces become distant images, frozen in moments of someone else's happiness. There are laughs, hugs, captions that speak of friendship and belonging. On the other side, someone observes in silence, feeling like a spectator of a film that doesn't include them. Social media transforms into showcases of possible lives, a collection of moments that seem to confirm that everyone else understood something they didn't. Comparison isn't a choice, it's a trap. The finger slides across the screen with the same monotony of an ancient ritual, and each photo seen is a silent reminder of exclusion. Yet, There's something hypnotic in that parade of faces and colors, a subtle promise of connection that is never fully fulfilled. But paradoxically, it is in this digital territory that the first signs of life emerge. Anonymous forums, conversations on faceless platforms, exchanges of messages with strangers who, for moments, seem to understand what no one in the physical world could hear. In these small cracks of anonymity, the soul finds a way to breathe. It is easier to speak without being seen. It is safer to confess without the gaze of the other piercing the defense. There is comfort in invisibility, the possibility of erasing oneself at any moment, of disappearing before it hurts. Jung might say that this is the collective unconscious in its contemporary form, a digital symbolic field where the individual seeks, even unknowingly, the lost fragments of themselves scattered by the invisible multitude of the network. But the truth soon sets in. Digital conversations are too light to sustain the weight of presence. Human warmth cannot be transmitted through pixels. Laughter doesn't vibrate through notifications. The absence of body is the absence of soul. And so, after each disconnection, the silence returns even denser. What once seemed like company reveals itself as a reflection, an echo that responds but doesn't listen. The emptiness grows in a spiral, mixing hope and frustration until it becomes an indistinct mass of accumulated emotions, difficult to name. The mind tries to organize the chaos, but there is no parameter. Without another human being to calibrate its own emotions, the self becomes its own measure, and every internal ruler is flawed. Have you ever felt something so intense that you couldn't tell if it was sadness or exhaustion? There are days when joy suddenly appears, like a spark, but fades for lack of a witness. Happiness seems to depend on the gaze that recognizes it. Without it, it becomes almost abstract. Similarly, sadness grows immeasurably because there is no one to contain it. The isolated individual becomes their own emotional echo chamber. Each feeling, without an interlocutor, reverberates infinitely. It is excess that suffocates, and what finds no voice accumulates. This silent accumulation resembles a kind of invisible collecting, stories kept, experiences stored, thoughts frozen awaiting a listener who may never come. Over time, these memories age within the soul, becoming fossils of unshared emotions. And what happens when emotions, deprived of expression, begin to take on a life of their own? The body responds. There are days when the chest feels heavy for no apparent reason, sleep becomes unstable, and the mind races in circles trying to justify a malaise that is, in fact, the sum of everything that has gone unsaid. Jung saw the body as the last symbolic instance of the psyche, that which speaks when consciousness refuses to listen. Loneliness at this stage is no longer just the absence of friends. It is the disconnection between body and soul, between feeling and understanding. And yet, paradoxically, it is at this point of exhaustion that something awakens. One night, amidst this routine of commuting, the protagonist decides to leave. Without a destination, only the impulse to breathe air not recycled by machines. The city sleeps, but there's a hidden vibration in the empty streets. The streetlights create patterns on the asphalt, and the distant sound of a train cuts through the air like a reminder of a time when movement still meant choice. He walks. And as he walks, a new sensation, or perhaps too old to be remembered, begins to emerge. The feeling of being watched, not by someone, but by something. It's not fear, it's presence. A silent, profound, almost familiar presence. How many times has something been watching us from the unseen depths, just waiting for us to recognize it? Carl Jung said that the unconscious manifests itself through meaningful coincidences, the small absurdities that escape logic. And that's when the improbable happens. Turning a corner, the protagonist finds an object lying on the ground, an old diary with a worn cover and yellowed pages. Inside, there is only one sentence written in firm handwriting. It's not the other person you lack, it's the dialogue with what dwells within you. No name, no date, just that sentence. A shiver runs through his body. Rationality tries to explain. Someone lost the notebook, a twist of fate, a coincidence. But something inside whispers that there's no chance. That message seemed to have traveled across time to find him. In the following days, That phrase haunts him. The dialogue with what dwells within you. It's as if the diary had opened a fissure inside him. He begins to dream of unknown voices, figures that are not people but personified ideas, dreams so vivid that they make him wake up sweating, with the impression of having conversed with someone who knew him better than he knew himself. In his morning notes, he tries to describe what he saw: a mirror reflecting different faces, a river flowing uphill, a child calling him by a name he had forgotten he possessed. The symbols multiply, and with them, the discomfort. What is more real? What one experiences while awake, or what one dreams while lucid? These experiences push him into a border zone between psychology and mystery. The isolation that once condemned him begins to reveal itself as a portal. The absence of friends, noise, and distractions creates space for an inner listening that the modern world has almost forgotten. And in this listening, something reorganizes itself. He begins to perceive patterns, the same number appearing repeatedly, seemingly random encounters with the same people, identical words emerging in different contexts. Reality begins to fold back on itself, as if wanting to tell him a forgotten story. Jung would say that the self, the center of psychic totality, has finally found a crack to manifest itself. It's not hallucination, it's integration. It's the soul trying to stitch together what the ego has fragmented. The protagonist begins to understand that the absence of human connections has led him, without him realizing it, to the brink of a greater encounter, not with another being, but with his own symbolic destiny. Everything that seemed like loss reveals itself as preparation. Each silence, each rejection, each night of absolute emptiness was in fact the space being cleared for something that could only now emerge. What if isolation wasn't punishment, but a form of communication? The questions no longer hurt, they illuminate. He understands that the accumulated emotions, the old fears, the frustrated expectations were coded messages from a part of himself seeking expression. The found diary, the dreams, the signs, everything seems to compose a single orchestra. For the first time, loneliness ceases to hurt and begins to have meaning. There is a strange serenity in this new understanding, the feeling that perhaps he was never truly alone. And it is at this precise point, when silence ceases to be absence and becomes revelation, that the outside world seems to respond. An unexpected email, an old phone call, a trivial invitation that sparks curiosity. The thread of reality pulls him out again, as if to say, "Now yes, you can return." He smiles. He doesn't know where he's going, but he feels that something essential has changed. The cycle of isolation has reached its limit, and on the other side of that limit, there is something waiting, something that breathes, observes, and calls him by the name he has not yet dared to pronounce. And in this invisible call, the plot begins again. When someone spends too much time molding themselves to what they imagine the other person wants, they lose the chance to truly be known. They live in constant self-vigilance, adjusting gestures, words, and even silences to fit others' expectations. It's a kind of slow, almost imperceptible disappearance, mistaken for adaptation. The fear of being too much becomes an instinct. With each encounter, there's incessant internal monitoring. Am I talking too much? Do I seem needy? Am I being inconvenient? This self-monitoring creates an artificial distance, even when the body is present. The other person speaks, but the mind races, evaluating each response, each smile, each pause. It's a double loneliness, being alone inside while being accompanied outside. The days pass with the slowness of broken clocks. Weekends drag on without plans. Holidays become mirrors of absence. Even birthdays, which once represented joy, become just a discrete reminder that no one will remember. The world seems to have its own rhythm, and those who live on the margins of coexistence perceive time differently. The hours are longer, the emotions denser. Every detail carries weight. Every isolated gesture acquires an exaggerated meaning. And in this void, paradoxically, something new is born. When there is no one to confirm who you are, the need to discover it for yourself arises. Carl Jung said that human beings only become complete when forced to confront their own solitude. for it is there that the unconscious begins to speak. And indeed, in the deepest silence, something begins to stir. The protagonist, previously a prisoner of comparison and doubt, begins to observe the world with different eyes. The absence of external validation opens space for a curious and unexpected gaze. What do I truly like? What is mine and not inherited from others? The answer comes slowly, but it comes. Creativity emerges like a discrete flame. He writes, draws, observes the shapes of light on buildings, discovers pleasure in the sound of rain. It is the rediscovery of his own inner territory, but self-knowledge also brings risks. Seeing too much of what is hidden can make human interaction even more difficult. Once you perceive the theatricality of interactions, the rehearsed courtesies, the automatic smiles, the conversations designed to fill the silence, it's almost impossible to go back to acting as before. Clarity comes at a high price. The protagonist begins to feel like a stranger among his own kind. Every word seems like a code, every social gesture a predictable choreography. And he who so longed to belong now realizes he can no longer participate in the game without a feeling of falsity. Clarity has become a glass prison. Have you ever felt that understanding the world too well makes it impossible to simply live in it? Excessive self-consciousness weighs heavily. Before, the fear was of being rejected, now it's of being unable to deceive oneself, and yet the desire for connection remains. The mind rehearses conversations, imagines reunions, constructs dialogues that never happen. The heart beats with expectation. And when the real opportunity finally arises, an invitation for coffee, an unexpected message, a gesture of interest, it all begins again. The nervousness, the calculation, the anticipated exhaustion. Every phrase is measured, every laugh is rehearsed. By the time the meeting arrives, emotional exhaustion has already taken over. Spontaneity has vanished. What should be simple becomes a careful performance, an attempt to control the unpredictable, and in the end, the connection slips through one's fingers. But something changes during one of these attempts. In the middle of a trivial conversation, there's a pause, an unplanned silence, and it's in that instant that the improbable happens. The other person observes him with genuine attention, without haste, without judgment. No words are spoken, but there's a feeling of recognition. It's brief, almost imperceptible, and yet it's enough. For the first time, the protagonist feels seen, not by what he tries to show, but by what he is when he forgets to control himself. This break in the routine of fear ignites something new, the possibility of truth. Why is this small opening so powerful? Perhaps because there is no effort involved. The encounter happens despite the defenses, not because of them. In the days that follow, this memory becomes a point of light. He realizes that perhaps he no longer needs to plan every gesture, because authenticity, when it arises, is uncontrollable, and precisely for that reason, real. He then begins to wonder if vulnerability isn't what he always tried to avoid, and at the same time what he most needed to experience. Jung stated that individuation, the process of becoming who one is, requires a confrontation between the mask and the face, and that is exactly what unfolds. The mask begins to give way. The small adaptations, the automatic speech, the social disguises disintegrate little by little. The original self, so long suppressed, begins to breathe again. But spiritual rebirth, like all profound transformation, requires a trial, and it comes without warning. An unexpected situation, perhaps a rejection, perhaps a misunderstanding, throws him back into the abyss of doubt. Everything he had achieved seems to crumble. The old mind screams again, "You'll never fit in." The temptation to retreat is immense. However, there is a subtle difference this time. Now he knows he can go through the pain without losing himself. The fall is not failure, it is a return to the field where the soul is strengthened. Deep down, something within him begins to understand that there is no turning back. There is only a path forward. Who are we when we no longer need to be accepted? The answer comes, silent and firm, during an ordinary dawn. The protagonist walks the streets again, the same ones as before, but now everything seems different. The city has a different texture. The lights don't hurt, they only guide. Each sound, each shadow, carries a discrete meaning. He realizes that the streets have always been there, waiting, that the world never rejected him. It was he who had exiled himself from himself. A feeling of reconciliation envelops him. For the first time in a long time, there is peace. And it is in this moment of serenity that a coincidence surprises him. Upon entering a small bookstore to escape the rain, he finds in the window the same title he had read in the diary he found weeks before. An old copy with a blue cover. Upon opening it, he discovers on the first page a dedication that seems addressed to him. He who has learned to be alone can now love. His heart races. He smiles, but doesn't seek explanations. Life has ceased to be an enigma to be deciphered and has become a presence to be lived. Jung taught that meaning is not found, it is created. And at that moment, the meaning is clear. Everything that was absence was preparation. The emptiness, the silence, the fear. They were seeds of what now blossoms naturally. The being has rediscovered its center. What was loneliness transforms into solitude, a state of fullness, not of lack, but of completeness. And when the sun rises that morning, the world seems the same, but he is no longer. There is a new perspective that recognizes the beauty of the ordinary, the sound of the wind, the murmur of people, the laughter of someone in the distance. None of this belongs to him, but it all includes him. For the first time he feels that he is simply in the world. But something still lurks. A feeling that the cycle doesn't end here. It's merely preparing for the final revelation. Because every awakening brings with it one last test, the encounter with that which lies hidden behind the light itself. And that's where the path now calls you, to the place where the spirit must choose between understanding and transcending. There are nights when thought becomes a living, almost audible presence, a voice that comments on every gesture, every choice, every real or imagined mistake. It is the echo of solitude, transformed into conscience. At first, this voice seems hostile, judging, accusing, mocking, but over time the protagonist realizes that it is the only constant dialogue that remains. The problem is that when one listens only to oneself for too long, this voice acquires too much power. It becomes judge and defendant, advisor and executioner. It dictates the rhythm of the day, deciding whether what was done is worthy or insufficient. And it is at this point that isolation reaches its most subtle form: mental imprisonment. There are no visible bars, but thought does not rest. The nights lengthen. The silence of the house is so profound, it almost feels textured. The hours when others talk, laugh, or meet become for the one who is alone a territory where time stretches like an empty road. The mind searches for something to occupy itself with, and finding nothing outside, plunges inward, precisely when the body most needs rest. Sleep, which should be a refuge, transforms into a battlefield between the desire to forget and the need to feel. There is a moment, always the same, when the gaze is lost on the dark ceiling and the question returns, why me? But something begins to change when this question ceases to be a lament and becomes research. Carl Jung said that true spiritual awakening begins when a person stops running from their own shadow. And that is what the protagonist learns, slowly and painfully, that solitude did not come to punish him, but to teach him to listen to what the noise of the world has always muffled. Each absence, each rejection, each sleepless night was, without me realizing it, a training in sensitivity. Isolation, previously seen as failure, now reveals itself as a school of perception. He who observes the world from a distance learns to see what others ignore. The small subtleties, the silences laden with meaning, the unspoken intentions. Ordinary social life resembles a theater, fixed roles, predictable lines, occasional laughter. Those who have experienced emotional exile learn to decipher the script and therefore are no longer content with superficialities. They desire relationships that support truth. And this, although it may seem like a burden, is a gift. The world desperately needs people capable of feeling deeply, of listening without haste, of seeing beyond appearances. What seemed like weakness reveals itself as strength. Depth is what anchors humanity amidst the rush of time. However, understanding is not enough. Action is necessary. The protagonist, now more self-aware, understands that the next step is not to wait for someone to save him, but to offer the world what he has learned in silence. He discovers that love in any form is not born from the encounter between equals, but from the gesture of making space for the other within oneself. He decides to start small, a good morning said with intention, a sincere message, a gaze held for a second longer. The connection is not in grand declarations, but in small acts of presence. Do you, the viewer, realize how this also applies to your own life? How many times have you missed out on connecting with someone for fear of seeming vulnerable? How many opportunities for connection have you wasted trying to appear busy, balanced, or uninterested? The practice of transformation begins with something simple: courage. Courage to be seen as one is, without masks, without edited versions. Courage to try again, even after disappointments. Courage to allow oneself to exist aloud. The protagonist discovers that the world doesn't reject those who are genuine, it only tests the sincerity of their surrender. And when he finally understands this, everything changes. The inner voice, once tyrannical, becomes a guide. Instead of criticism, it offers advice. Instead of fear, it provides direction. The self that judged him now teaches him. It is the beginning of integration, the reconciliation between what he feels and what he thinks. There is an almost imperceptible yet absolute turning point. He wakes up on an ordinary day, with the same light streaming through the curtains, the same distant sounds of the street. And yet, something is different. His mind is quiet. His body feels light. There is no euphoria, only serenity. He realizes that life doesn't need to change to be new, it just needs a change in perspective. The same places, the same people, the same routines take on a different hue when one learns to inhabit them with presence. What was once a prison becomes a refuge. Home, which was a confinement, becomes the center again. He understands finally that being alone is not the same as being isolated. Loneliness is absence. Solitude is communion with oneself. You, who are listening to these words, can feel it now. Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe. There is a voice within you, perhaps timid, perhaps forgotten, that tries to say, "You are here, you have always been." This is the essence of Jung's teaching, the return to the inner center, to the self that observes without judging, that welcomes without demanding, that recognizes without requiring. When this presence awakens, fear loses its power. The world ceases to be a threat and becomes a field of discovery. From this point on, everything is a choice. The protagonist understands that he no longer needs to seek approval because he has learned to give meaning to his own existence. He no longer wants the world to see him. He wants to see him in depth. Each person who crosses his path becomes an opportunity for exchange, each conversation an open window, and in each gaze he recognizes the same universal desire that once consumed him, the desire to belong. He smiles, not with satisfaction, but with compassion. He realizes that his entire life was, in fact, a rehearsal for this moment, the moment when he learns that it is not necessary to understand everything to be at peace. There is a beauty that only emerges after suffering has been understood. It is the beauty of those who have fallen and risen again, of those who have known absence and yet chosen to remain human. The protagonist, now whole, walks through the city with the same body, but a different spirit. Each step is light. Each breath is an answer, and within him a new certainty. There is no healing outside of human experience, and there is no human experience outside of love. And that's what I want you to take away from this journey. Loneliness is not a sentence, it's an initiation. It exists to teach us that everything we seek in others begins with what we offer of ourselves. Cultivate presence. Listen attentively. Speak sincerely. And when you feel fear, remember, fear is merely the soul's invitation to go deeper. Don't wait for the right moment. The moment is now. If this story touched you, if something within your own experiences resonated, share your voice. Write in the comments what you felt, even if it's anonymously. Your presence here is part of the transformation that this channel wishes to spread. Like this video, subscribe, and help keep this conversation alive about what truly matters, the rediscovery of the human within us. Because every gesture, every word, and every sincere sharing are small sparks of the same fire, the fire of consciousness awakening in the midst of darkness. And remember, you were never truly alone. There was always someone, inside and outside of you, waiting to hear what the silence had been trying to say for so long.